Okay, so welcome to the session about analyzing the Drupal community with a data-driven approach. And a couple words about me and the Drupal community and the interest for this analysis of the Drupal community through data. I'm director of Nuvole, a small company working mostly with NGOs and focused on Drupal projects for large NGOs. I've been a Drupal developer for a dozen years, and I'm now still mostly a Drupal developer for Nuvole. But from time to time, due to the fact that we work with very large organizations, we get exposed to large data sets, and just out of fun or in the time that we have available, we do some analysis on those data sets just to better understand our clients. This time, we targeted the Drupal community not out of any special work interest, but just of generic community interested in Drupal. I would say that my position is between an internal and external observer, meaning I've been part of the Drupal community for a dozen years, but not particularly active in community topics. I mean, I'm just a Drupal developer, so I know Drupal the product, but I'm not familiar with the dynamics of the community in itself. This is not the first time that we reflect on the Drupal community in general, and actually it has been an ongoing issue at all DrupalCon. I mean, the first time I know of was at DrupalCon Barcelona, but not the recent one, the 2007 one. And this was an important part of Dries' presentation. It was not called Dries Note back at the time, but Dries' presentation at Barcelona 2007. I remember that he went through some community numbers, not really an organized presentation of numbers, but just a few data points. And he mentioned, just as a data point, that 90% of the audience of this conference is male, he said. And the following slide had this content. We are working on that, just as a mission, as a long-term mission for the future. And okay, we will see about 10 years later if the effort to improve was successful. Actually, it might not have been the Dries note, since I wasn't able to locate the specific slide saying this, but someone is confirming. Okay, it was so. Okay, so sorry for then the misattribution. It was from my memories from 2007, so I might have gotten it wrong. It was my first Drupal event, and we will say that you were pretty much accurate, actually. But we will see it in a few minutes. Just a word of caution. Data mining on something that is completely open to the public is crazy in itself. I mean, there is really a user that has a username Watch Online Aston Villa versus Arsenal. Actually, there is this user for all combination of soccer teams in Europe. So whatever your soccer team is, there is a Drupal user with this name, or kind of. This name, Premier League, actually, not all football teams in Europe. But so the registration form is open to the public, meaning that you get a lot of data pollution, including this stuff. Still, these users then disappeared in most other statistics, since they do not have a properly filled-in profile. A spam user is not allowed to fill in profile data before verifying the email address right now. So that was smart, since it guarantees that all other figures we will see actually make sense. I mean, that there is probably a human being behind a Drupal user. Just to give an idea of numbers, we have about 2 million users on Drupal.org, 2,002,100, and we will see that at the current rate, we will get 3-4 new ones during this presentation. Put in perspective, it is a very large number. I mean, 15 times bigger than Darmstadt, even 3 times bigger than Frankfurt. But again, not all of them are humans, since these figures are the ones that we know to be a little bit skewed, and the rest will be more reliable. So we start with a rough overview that confirms what I've been saying so far. This is the growth rate of registered users on a monthly basis, okay, with some smoothing just to make the graph look nicer, starting in 2001 to today. Let's put something in perspective here. It starts with a peak, like the first 500 users are created on the same day. This is surely an import issue when the platform was migrated at a certain point back in time, and that they couldn't properly migrate user creation, probably. It was 2001, so I have no idea. Then in 2004, we have another huge bump. I call it huge bump since if you put things into perspective until 2006, you will see that this one looks small, but it is actually very, very high. And again, this is something that could be due to some kind of migration or infrastructural issue. If we go on, we can okay, I will divide it later. What's this one? This is most likely a spam attack. On the same day, we had 40,000 users, more than the average registering for the website. I've kept it on purpose just to show, to put things into perspective for our analysis. It looks big, but it was just one day. So it doesn't really affect numbers more than, it's 40,000 in 2 million. So it's still small compared to the total, but it is something that happened, most likely spam attack. Then you see here higher numbers and lower numbers, but more stable in recent years. As a first interpretation, I would, and this will be the same approach we use for the entire analysis, I would split the history in 3 eras, Drupal 6 and earlier. Call it the unsupported era, if you wish. But I will conflate it into Drupal 6 just for convenience. Before January 2011. The Drupal 7 era, the lifespan of Drupal 7 as the latest release, that was January 2011 to November 2015, and the Drupal 8 era, November 15 to present day and future. If you go back here, then 2011 is here, and indeed there is a peak around that date, peak of interest, and this peak is Drupal 8. The release of Drupal 8 actually resulted in more registrations to Drupal.org, which could be expected, but also unexpected, meaning that the people who were waiting for Drupal 8 were most likely already registered on Drupal.org. So it managed to attract external developers. From a community perspective, I would say this is the most important feature we have in the registration history. If you want to see the numbers corresponding to the graph, okay, it's the Drupal 6 era was seeing 200 new registrations per day. Drupal 7 was seeing 600, and nowadays we are stable around 130, 120 if you keep the last month into account. Figures are not updated to today, just to a couple weeks ago in late August, when I downloaded all numbers. We will have time to explain how we obtain numbers. So there is an 80% decrease here. Should we be worried? I would say not necessarily. This is the only indicator expected to be heavily influenced by spam, and the rough comparison based on the other factors that we are going to see soon shows that we can explain 80% with just better anti-spam in general. So we get better users, or more human users, if you wish. There is still a little bit of decrease, but the current growth figure have been stable for a while. And of course, all of these are new people who join the community. So the community in itself stays stable for the data we have. So we shouldn't be too much worried. There are much fewer registration, but we shouldn't be much worried about that. Let's take a look at geography and countries of people who register. You will see that it's US, India, and Great Britain, and the top three are the same in all periods. The top three countries are the same, but their ratios and other countries are affecting the numbers. You will especially see here new registrations from Vietnam, Indonesia in the recent years. And we will discuss and come back and explain something more on this just in a few slides. So as a first perspective, okay, it's USA, India, United Kingdom. It's 60% of the registrations, and this is rather stable. What is not stable is the internal balance between the three countries. For example, if you count how many people for India register compared to people from the US, you have 1 out of 4 in older ages, 1 out of 3 in the D7 era, and now they are really closer, 1 in 1.6. This is something that, even if it is just a number, it actually has some effects on the community, on the distributions of community events, and it should be something that we have to think about. We are now analyzing proxy variables just to make sure these are real humans or looking real. I found I generated this just by accident. I mean, a wrong field that I put, but it turned out to be so interesting that I made the slide out of it. This is the distribution of first names, and it is actually quite telling. I mean, I cannot explain why David is the most common name in all 3 eras, but probably it reflects some statistics in the US. And I'm not a US citizen or a native English speaker, so I have totally no idea. But if you look at the names here, David, Michael, Chris, John, Daniel, Peter, James, Paul, they are the stereotypical name that one would think about. I mean, and the trend is the same to this date. I mean, David, John, Michael, Alex, Daniel, James. It looks like something that has no diversity at all, meaning this could be a name set of a community that is totally a plain developer community as people would expect it. If you look at the last names, though, there is something much more interesting. Smith is first, used to be first. And now it has been replaced by Kumar and Singh. Kumar and Singh are last names that are very common in India. or people from Indian origin. And numbers, of course, cannot be very significant since the distribution of last names, and for especially last names, is not common. But still, it is much more meaningful than expected. Kumar and Singh are very popular in India, and indeed, India is the country where most people are coming from, except the US. Smith is still strong. Nguyen is popular in Vietnam, and indeed, Vietnam was one of the emerging countries you will remember from our earlier slide. So all of this is in very, very good agreement. We have our last trick for analyzing geography. That is here. It was an unintentional honeypot that we had on the site in all the registration. The widget where you had to specify a country was mandatory, and older version of Drupal were proposing the first value as default value. You wouldn't find a widget asking you select a value and having to choose one, but the first one would be chosen and you could alter it. Meaning that if you were doing a fake registration, you would most of the time pick the first value, which happened to be Afghanistan. And Afghanistan, of course, is unreasonable to assume as a top country. And indeed, if you go back here again, Afghanistan was the 5th country. All of these are fake. Not all, maybe 90% of these are fake. 95% actually, because now we know. And Afghanistan was accounting for 2.3% of all accounts in the Drupal 6 era, and recalculated, not shown on the slides, in the Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 era, it decreased to just 0.1%. These are probably the very, very lazy people who just pick the first one, but a few genuine Afghan citizens. And so data are really strong, and the conclusion we can find from here is that numeric indicators are all in very good agreement, and that Drupal 8 is marking the transition to a global community. It was already a global community, but it is becoming more global due to the balance of powers that is now becoming much, much more even than it used to be. Let's take a look at diversity. So close the circle with the figures from 10 years ago. In the Drupal 6 era, these are the numbers of female, male, other, and transgender, what is currently listed on Drupal.org. And numbers aside, here we have the ratio. The ratio of males was 89.85%, so my respect if it was just calculated randomly, since it was incredibly accurate. 90% is extremely close to it. And it has now decreased to 76%, so still 3 out of 4, but with a much larger diversity. Male is still dominant, but not as dominant as it used to be in the past. Continuing our analysis, we take a look at languages. This is quite interesting too. In the Drupal 6 era, we had many more speakers who could understand the English, I mean, as a first or a second language. Meaning that if you pick the first choices in combinations this time for languages, you got plain English as the first value. This has not changed. But you get English and Spanish in the past, English and French, English and something in the top choices. While if you now pick the top 5 choices, you will find that there are people who speak English, Spanish, but not English, or at least they do not mark English as a language they can speak. So maybe they are familiar enough to fill in a simple form, but not to sustain a conversation in English. Vietnamese, Indonesian, and French. So in the first era, we still have the domination of English in language. All popular combination include English as first or second tongue of people. Then there is a mix in the Drupal 7 era. Here you see people who speak only Spanish, people who speak only French in the top 5 languages. And here, all the first 5 language combination do not include English, except the one that is of people who just speak English. In this respect, it means that it has become much harder to communicate in natural language in the Drupal community, since obviously people who only speak English will not be able to communicate with others in their native language, and these ones will not be able to communicate with the English ones. It shows that there is a lot of potential especially for local events, for local mentoring. As a community indication in itself, we should forget the idea that we can expect English to be understood by everybody in the community. Okay, just for fun, some checks on usernames. The longest legitimate username we have on Drupal.org is the Office of the Vice President for Research and Technology, and he probably types it every time. There are longer ones, but the other ones are spam. And if you would like to have a vanity username of only 1 character, I'm sorry, they are almost all taken. And actually, they used to be case sensitive, apparently. So we have username A lowercase and username uppercase A, which are 2 different usernames on Drupal.org. Apparently, lowercase w and 9 are not taken, or at least are not exposed by the API. So hurry up if you wish to get it. I didn't try to register them, not to spoil the situation now. But so they might be invalid nowadays, but they are still up for taking. There's also a very smart guy, I would say, who managed to register apostrophe as a username. And this is a deliberate attempt of an SQL injection attack on Drupal.org for those who are familiar with databases. And okay, what's out? I mean, if we managed to resist, it was created 9 years ago. So if we managed to resist until now, then probably forms on Drupal.org are safe for this kind of users and this kind of potential attack. Okay, so back to serious mode. Who are the new Drupalers? The personas for the old Drupaler is English-speaking, first or second language, US or Europe, male, predominantly. Persona for a new Drupaler is just much harder to guess. I mean, much less predictable. There is a large share of people from India and Asia in general, a relatively large share of non-males, a quite large amount of people who do not speak English at all. Opportunities for local events, opportunities for mentorship in languages other than English. Let's go on analyzing the community interactions. So we started analyzing the community in itself. We now move to saying how we could study and track the interaction between people in the community. There's the issue queues, but they are very hard to follow. They are scarcely meaningful, meaning that if I post to the same issue as someone else, this probably means nothing. We have the same problem, but it's hard to extract very meaningful information from here. It's hard to understand if someone has a real role in a discussion or is merely contributing some meaningless text to an issue, and it is not useful for our analysis. The module contributions are scattered, are easier to track, and a bit more meaningful. Mentorship in itself is probably the best indicator because it's easy to analyze. It's on the profile page on Drupal.org. And it's still not perfect, as we will see, but it is still the most powerful we have available. So we start with we ignore issues since anyway there's no useful information we can extract there. Modules, the top 5 modules having a Drupal 8 version. If you take the number of active maintainers, the average is 1.7, not really so many. The minimum is 1, okay. I hope he's in good health. And the maximum is 5. Number of active contributors is much, much better. By active, I mean someone who committed code during the last year. Average is 19, minimum 1, again, maximum 86. 86 is web form module, in case someone wonders. The highest numbers are web form. On average, we have 12 active contributors for each active maintainer, which is quite healthy, meaning that if a maintainer has to abandon a module, then there is space for new community members to get involved, assuming that older community members tend to be maintainer of modules rather than a simple contributor, or to be made maintainer of modules. And this 12-to-1 ratio between contributors and committers shows that there is space for empowerment of newer members, which is very good. I mean, if you give them some responsibility, they will probably stay longer and help to the development of Drupal as a product and community. Moving to mentors. The number of users acknowledging at least one mentor is quite high. We have over 4,000 people who acknowledge a mentor on Drupal. And we have 3,000 people being credited as mentors, with an average of 2.6 per person. Not bad again. I mean, if these numbers are to be believed, but usually they are rather reliable. All people who acknowledge a mentor at least have, say, 2 to 3 mentors, with a peak of 63 mentors. Here are the rock stars, in case, again, someone is curious. Nothing really surprising here. These are all respected and more or less known community members, especially the first ones. So this is rather okay as numbers. Nothing to see here. I will leave it a little longer in case someone wants to read all names. But indeed, these are the names of prolific community members, well-known community members, and well-known contributors to modules. So it is very realistic that people learn something from these guys, meaning fixing an issue or trying to contribute to a module where the person here was the maintainer. So key facts about interactions in general. The top modules and mentorship data provided easy ways to study the interactions. And then again, we have some limitation of reliability. For modules, it is more reliable, because if something gets committed, then there is a real interaction. I mean, I reviewed something coming from you. And so it is two-directional, meaning you did something and I reviewed it. It is limited to coding, which to community purposes, it is rather limiting, actually. Mentorship is less reliable since I list my mentors, but they are not going to approve me. And there are even a few users who list a system account named Drupal as a mentor. And of course, they couldn't learn anything from a bot, but they still list it as their mentor. And we would need some kind of verification, some kind of verified mentorship if we really wanted to extract the maximum informative value from here and use it to measure community interactions. Still, it was interesting to take a look at this. Okay, we've taken a look at the community, at interactions within the community, and whatever we can extract from here. Someone will wonder how we did this, and before we move to conclusion, I will just show you how we did it. Actually, there's a hidden gem on Drupal.org that is called the Drupal.org API. The name is, of course, very unfortunate, since it is very easy to confuse it with the Drupal API, but it has nothing to do with the Drupal API. It is a public API that queries Drupal.org using the RESTful Web Services module. I mean, just a standard implementation, just as I write here, a small step for a man, but a giant leap for data miners, since you can get you can get all Drupal users just by querying it. It works, it is well documented, and it will give you properly formatted JSON files. In a first experiment I did last year, I simply used scraping, I mean, just trying to download all users from Drupal.org. Someone probably is still hating me for that, but now they told me that the Drupal.org API exists, and I very happily used it. It still took about 10 hours to download all numbers we needed, since it is rate limiting, and while it is cached, I was probably the only one actually using it, so now it is cached and you can get fast answers, but the time I ran the queries, I was the only one, so there was nothing to take advantage of. All data are in a 7 gigabytes Git repository with JSON and a little bit of other stuff. And for processing, a standard computer is enough. I mean, but you still need 12 gigabytes, so it's still a rather long computation. For processing, we used lots of different tools, mostly Python and R, and tools using it, and lots of libraries. Some graphics library for the first graph I've shown for registration flow, registration growth, and everything that was available for small tasks like glue code and basic manipulation, as you get data that look very similar to what you would like them to be, but not 100% the way you need them, but then it's easy manipulation. Okay, some final considerations on what we can consider as insights from this analysis. Okay, some ideas and suggestions on how to make this kind of analysis easier. We could tweak the API a bit to expose data in a way that enables easier processing. At the moment, probably I download too much stuff, and I could with other endpoints, I could maybe be more effective and download a small amount of data and get the same informative value. One should redo this analysis with confirmed users only. For example, the API does not expose confirmed users only, it exposes all users. Or with sanitized data in general, for whatever definition we have for it. We should also include some indicator for data relevance, like the last login of the user is currently not exposed, but if it was exposed, then I could have created graphs telling you how many people are actually active of all those that we've seen so far. Other considerations, this is not big data. I mean, 7 gigabytes still fits on a USB key, so you cannot call it big data. Still, it's large data, especially if one wants to go one step further and move to visualization, where one would have to process all records. There's a lot of further work possible, and as a suggestion, if someone is going to continue the work on here, advanced visualizations would be a good idea, and the network graph analysis for the community interactions. From there, I'm sure there's a lot of other useful information buried there. It just needs time, computing power, and a lot of effort in cleaning data the right way. And final recommendations, I would recommend to whoever is interested in analyzing community dynamics to make data mining a habit. Drupal.org is lucky enough to have many public data available, and to most of them, we don't have privacy concerns applying, since it is just public contributions and public data that do not reveal anything about a specific person, so one can analyze interactions in a very generic way. And my last recommendation is, okay, try just to think different, and we have all this data, and try to turn them into business value, included business not in the sense of money, but business in the sense of reflecting on the community and the health of the community. We are done. Thank you. And I'm available for any questions if you have questions. I anticipated someone asking about the tools, so I wrote 3 slides about it.
Thank you, Andrea. It was very interesting. Just one thing about the countries. Wanted to ask. There's a big elephant missing in the room. How come there's no representation of China in the
China and Africa. There are the 2 ones that, okay, could explain Africa, meaning that, of course, it's evolving in some respect, but I would expect it to be placed higher. Here I've only shown the first 5, but I've analyzed all of it. And about China, yes, really, I cannot explain it if it is, again, community or probably language is a barrier, a very significant barrier for China, and this applies to the whole open source world, as far as I know. But some local evangelism or something could probably help very much there. Please, if you have something to contribute as an answer or a further question.
Hi, I'm Ryan Asad. I work on Drupal.org with Neil Drum here. Okay. And yeah, the reason we don't see as many Chinese developers is they have their own Chinese Drupal.org website that they manage themselves for their community. So a lot of the Chinese users we don't see because they go to where the language is at, and that's where a lot of the activity happens. So we don't have as much insight into what's going on there, but there is stuff happening there. Okay, good to know. Still, there is probably no measurable interaction then if it is a separate word, but okay, we can hope they will merge sometime. Other questions? And I just wanted to confirm your suspicions about the drop in the D8 era. Okay. The large spam attack that was at the very top of the list, that precipitated the Drupal.org engineering team to start looking for more spam solutions. So like on your very first graph, we've implemented several different ways to, our strategy was actually to prevent user registrations, to prevent spam. And so starting in like 2014, that second big spike there, that was during DrupalCon Amsterdam.
Here, you mean?
Yeah. Okay. And then we started adding new ways to keep spammers from being able to create accounts, and that's why we've seen some more drops, more stable. So the numbers down there are more reflective of real users compared to how it used to be.
Yeah, that's clear from the analysis, and anything else. Thanks for confirming. And well, indeed, one graph hides many stories, and you can explain every point there. This is the fun about analyzing data in an abstract way here. Others? Okay. Thank you then.
Thank you.